Okay, thanks a lot for being here. I'm actually, I usually do give PowerPoint talks, but I decided I'd go back maybe to the 20th century, maybe to the 19th century, and actually just talk to you. How's that? We're humans. We've been communicating that way for a long time. Although there are a couple places here I wish I had a slide or two, but we'll see what it does. The other advantage is I think maybe I can speed this up a little bit so we can get back on schedule, give Ben a little time to talk. I do want to make a couple of points. I want to talk to you about climate change and risks, kind of what we know and what we don't know, and where there are opportunities and challenges. Because I think, we clearly face a changing world. It's funny, I don't know if I think of sustainability as keeping things stable. But that could be maybe something we can talk about later. But it's definitely about keeping things going for future generations. The operative word is change, okay? But look, nothing is stable. Everything changes over time, and you think about the Front Range of Colorado, right? Think 20, 30 years ago. What's the biggest change we've seen here? Anybody want to volunteer? What would you say is the biggest change in Colorado over the last 20, 30 years? Any suggestions? Population, I think that's right. I'd agree with that. We've seen rapid growth in population. We've also seen other changes. We've seen changes in lifestyle. We've seen changes in the kind of things we're concerned about. I mean, the environmental movement itself isn't even 50 years old. Terms such as sustainability are new. Think about women's rights, think about gay rights, how quickly the landscape has changed on that. So we do see a lot of change, including climate change. Now, climate itself has never been stable per se. There's always been some variability. But the thing is now we are seeing an acceleration of change, and the difference from the past is the cause is us. That is virtually certain. It's a fact the climate is changing. It is virtually certain that the cause is us. And it was mentioned that I was a part of the U.S. National Climate Change Assessment, which was released last year. Had a lot of good input from people in Boulder. And the key message from the assessment is the climate change is happening, and it's having an impact. So what does it mean for Colorado? I think some of this I'll go through it quickly. We are going to have higher temperatures. That is virtually certain. That means more heat waves, more heat stress, earlier snow melt. We're already seeing that. Water demand is probably going to go up. There'll be changes in things like where crops are grown. We're going to even have changes in air and water quality, because of changes in climate. And I think the air quality aspect of this does not get as much attention as it deserves. Critical issue, what's going to happen to precipitation? First question is, up or down? Well, we kind of don't know. To the southwest of California, it's likely that precipitation will decrease or certainly not increase. To the northeast, talking about New England, the Midwest, they're seeing increases in precipitation. We'll probably see more. We're kind of in a middle zone here. We're not so sure. The models suggest wetter winters and drier summers, but there are some reasons to take that with a little grain of salt because of some aspects of the models they don't get right yet. But another thought here, and I think it's appropriate for a concept on risk, is a lot of the things you see coming out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and assessments focus too much on the average changes, and they don't think about extremes and variability. And I think a number of thoughts about extremes. One is we are probably going to get more extremes, more intense wet events, more intense heat waves, greater floods, more intense droughts. And just think about what we've seen just in the last less than 15 years. Certainly, and as mentioned earlier, the floods of 2013, massive amount of rain, that we got 10 deaths, billions of dollars in damages. Now, did climate change cause it? That's not clear. Did it make it worse? Probably. It was probably a little warmer, probably a little more water vapor in the atmosphere than otherwise would have been. It was an early event in September where you sometimes see these things like what just came through this week. So in some ways was similar, but the air temperature is a lot colder, so it's not as bad. We also had a few years before that the drought of 2002. Precipitation levels were about a third to half below normal, some of the lowest stream flow on record. And that wasn't that, these two ones weren't that far apart. Now again, extremes have always happened. At a minimum, I'd argue that when they are happening now, they're probably in many cases somewhat worse Climate change will make a drought worse because temperatures are higher. You get more evapotranspiration. Again, rain events can be more because you get more water vapor in the atmosphere. It's hard to predict these extremes. It's very hard to predict exactly how they're going to change, but it seems entirely plausible that we're going to see more of them and possibly even greater floods and greater droughts than what we've had in the past. The other aspect of this is variability, what we call variability. Year-to-year climate, decade-to-decade climate. This hasn't been investigated much by organizations such as IPCC. It's harder to tell what's going to happen. And I think one of the problems is when we've done assessments of climate impacts, and I've been doing these for almost 30 years, we tend to assume an average change in climate. So we'll say temperature is going to go up so many degrees, precipitation will increase or decrease, but we impose it on a historic climate. We'll say, let's assume that the last 30 years happens again, but now it's 3 degrees warmer and 10% wetter. But that leaves out the changes in variability. What if we get more years in a row that are dry, or more greater swings, or decadal changes? And we may be missing out on key vulnerabilities. Think about water supply manager. We have multi-year storage, but what happens if that amplitude of change increases? Can we cope with, will that multi-year storage be enough, as an example? What happens to farmers who might be able to cope with, okay, I can take one bad year and 4 or 5, but maybe the bad years start coming more in a row. So that's something we might be a little too optimistic in terms of our studies. We haven't really thought that through, and I do think we have the tools to think this through. So I've been talking about changes that we think will come in the future, and I say the variability is uncertain, by the way, but the change in it, but we need to consider it as a matter of risk management. The other thing is we need to think about extremes that can happen now. And we've seen these things. You saw a slide here of Hurricane Katrina, we had Hurricane Sandy, we've had our own flooding. It's an awful lot that can happen now that we may not be planning for. It might not be in the historic record, but it still might be plausible. Think about the Southwest or Texas and Oklahoma had extreme heat wave a few years ago. Well, we could have a heat wave over here. High pressure systems can just sit here for many weeks. We've seen extreme rainfall now. I know what to tell you about that. Other things can happen. So we need to be thinking about these kind of things. Now, this presents challenges and opportunities. And I want to say that when we think about adaptation, we need to think about what we know. We know temperature is going to go up. We know there'll be certain changes of precipitation. We also have to think about what's possible. This is where the risk management comes in. And you have to think through what's appropriate, given the likelihoods and maybe relative unlikelihoods of things. There are 4 types of adaptation. Now here's where I wish I had a slide, but there are 4 types of adaptation I see, and I'll go through this slowly. One is do what we've been doing. You don't make changes and figure that, we can figure things out. We'll adapt as things go along. The second is what I call sort of reform or doing what makes sense anyway. There's an awful lot of things we ought to be doing, like water conservation, is a very good example, using water much more efficiently in agriculture and urban uses. We're not doing enough of those. They make sense now. They make sense even more because of climate change. That's number 2. Number 3, incremental changes, all right? You're building something, you're putting in a culvert, say, to anticipate a certain amount of peak runoff. You might put in one a little bit bigger because maybe the peak goes up, okay? That's oftentimes, if you're doing it anyway, it's not that expensive. That may make a lot of sense. The 4th one is the harder, transformation. It's where we do things differently. We don't live where we lived before. We change livelihoods. We make big changes. That's a tough one. Politicians don't want to tell people you can't live here. It's always we got to rebuild and rebuild stronger. So think about that. I think there's a lot of role for the private sector and for government in doing this. Government clearly is going to have to set standards, invest in research. The private sector, though, can carry out a lot of this. They can, develop new technologies, develop new management techniques. There's a lot that can be done there, and there's a lot that's happening with other cities. By the way, we're doing a study for the Kresge Foundation, looking at community-based adaptation, looking at 17 cities around the country. They're doing a lot of innovative things, ranging from involving citizens, building up neighborhood resilience, incorporating climate change in their infrastructure management, requiring higher freeboard that kind of thing, getting generators and sensitive equipment off of first floors, bringing in science into the decision making, and that kind of thing, and supporting planning, which is an important thing here, incorporating, looking for opportunities where I think we can improve resilience and robustness, that's the other term we don't hear much about this, to deal with these risks. So the final thought I want to make is that we tend to be very intolerant of our public officials in terms of failure. We expect perfection. And if I just say, well, look, you're dealing with people. Okay, we're smart, we accomplish a lot, but we're people, we make mistakes. And I think what we need is a culture that is willing to tolerate experimentation, for one. And experimentation means not every experiment works. So you try some things out, you monitor them, you have metrics, they don't work, you try something different. Another thing that's clear, I think, for extremes is that you can't prepare for everything. They say, are we safe? What does that mean? Safety is usually measured as a probability. But it means we have to communicate that we can't plan for every contingency or every outcome, and therefore we need some contingency planning. So what do we do if the sewer treatment plant fails or some area gets flooded that we hadn't planned for? That I think we need to communicate that, and in this world of climate change, there's a lot that can happen that frankly we just don't know. So I think we face a lot of challenges, we also face a lot of opportunities, but I think there's an awful lot that can be done. One of the things I would say is don't wait for the perfect forecast of climate change. I've been doing this 30 years. It's not out there. There's not a forecast. We know the direction of change at best, but there's an awful lot we can do with that information to move ahead and to reduce our risks to these events. So thank you very much.